Hey listeners, this is a rerun, or as I like to call it, a TAC Reload preamble. You might be hearing more of these. And I'm just going to be real with you. I've been doing this podcast for a lot of years. I've been doing it full time for about 2. I was hoping to grow it into a full-time income. I said I'd give it a year, and I've given it 2. I've cashed out retirement accounts. I've cashed out Bitcoin. Lived off of savings while trying to grow the podcast, and it has grown by God's grace by leaps and bounds, but it has not yet become a full-time income. There's a time to spend and a time to save, Ecclesiastes says. So I will be taking on some private contracting work, have gun, will travel, which means, especially by God's grace, pretty soon I'll be entering in some pretty strenuous training as far as the schedule goes, so you're probably going to get some more reruns. If you don't go back and listen to old episodes, maybe they'll be new to you. But I just wanted to give you a heads up and be real with you as to what's going on. As Ecclesiastes says, there's a time to spend and a time to save. Hopefully we'll build back up some savings and still be able to get out a podcast pretty regularly. I've been doing about a podcast a day for a long time. A lot of podcasts only do a podcast a week. So hopefully you will bear with me. I will try and get the patrons more special insider-only content as they get already. I don't want to leave them out to dry. They're the ones that step up and support the podcast, and I really hope that they feel they're getting their money's worth. But if not, no hard feelings. I will try and keep up on the Patreon stuff, but you guys may see a little bit of a drop-off, at least periodically, depending on schedule, on new episodes. You'll still get new episodes, maybe just not one a day. So enjoy this Tactical Reload episode. Was going through some older episodes and I thought, you know what? This one might be worth putting out again. The 1911 for the modern gunfighter. Is it still relevant? With so many plastic fantastics and tactical Tupperware and Wonder 9s. Now, as you'll hear in the bio, I've been a professional gunfighter for most of my adult life, and in that, I've used the Beretta, the Glock, Smith & Wesson M&P, SIG 229. I've also used and chosen to use, of my own free will, 1911 pattern guns, whether they be 2011s or modernized 1911s. And after all, by God's grace and the things He's allowed me to do, hopefully that's one of the things that sets this podcast apart, is that it's from real-world first-hand experience. Not just theoretically, like somebody that's used these in real life. If you appreciate that, you appreciate the content, you appreciate that this is not just another gun commercial wrapped up as a show or something like that, this is supported by viewers like you. If you'd like to support, I'd be humbled. There should be a link for either Good Shepherd Training or Patreon in the show notes. With that, I'm going to plug in this older episode. Have a blessed weekend. Hello again to the gunfighting community. Welcome back to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting, guns, weapons, tactics, from real-world training and experience, and most importantly, from a Judeo-Christian worldview. Because God is always at the top and in the center of everything. And I hope to keep Him that way in my life, and everything that I do in this podcast is no different. Today, before we get into the bio, I'm just going to let you know we're going to be talking about the 1911 platform. The 1911 for gunfighters. Before we get into the bio, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment, and help grow this community of ours. Now into the bio. If you don't want to listen, you can skip ahead to about 3.5 minutes. So a little bit about me and who I am. First and foremost, I am a Christian. I make no apologies for that. I grew up in the southeastern United States, what most would consider poor. Grew up hunting and fishing and shooting at a very early age. I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I did combat tours, plural, in Iraq. After that, I was an urban warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps. After the Marine Corps time, I went to work for LAPD, where I worked regular assignments and more specialized assignments. I've also been a private contractor for the federal government. I've also served the United States Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. I have been a state rifle and pistol champion in a few different states, a few different times over. I started shooting competitions even before I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I am very blessed to have all those talents, and I am very blessed that God got me through everything that He's gotten me through alive and in one piece and made it back safely when a lot of other good men did not. Not because of anything that I am, but because of who God has made me and because of how much God has protected me and sheltered me. I have served as the commander of a tactical team in a large metropolitan area where our primary job is to stock active shooters. I've hunted and fished all over this beautiful country, everything from whitetail on the East Coast and mule deer on the West Coast, and elk and bear and wolf and exotics, buffalo. I've been a professional hunter and guide, professional firearms instructor, FBI certified, NRA certified, other 3-letter government agency certified, professional firearms instructor for a lot of years. And as I mentioned first, the most alpha thing about me is I am a follower of Jesus Christ, the ultimate alpha male. With that being said, we'll get into today's topic. All right, on to today's topic, the 1911. Now, just off the cuff here, a little bit about the history of the 1911. This will by no means be all-inclusive, but for a lot of people, especially people that have gotten into guns in the last couple of years, they likely have gotten into polymer striker-fired handguns, and there's good reasons for that. But a little bit about the history of the 1911. Obviously, the 1911, adopted in the year 1911, it was a development of earlier pistols, even before that, going back to the early 1900s and the turn of the century. Some might call it the world's first modern combat handgun. You might call it the Luger, which came out a few years earlier in 1908 and chambered in 9mm. But either way, the 1911 is a very early and still relevant combat handgun that's well over 100 years old and still in use, still in service today. Now, I don't know how much of a purist you want to be. I'm not talking about purely the original military version of the 1911. By that measure, you couldn't even count the World War II 1911 because that would be the 1911A1. But I'm pretty much talking about anything based on the 1911 platform today. So it doesn't have to be the pure, I'm talking like 1911, 1911A1. Anything based on that is basically going to fall into what we're talking about today for the 1911. Obviously, the original and probably still the most popular chambering for the 1911 is the 45 ACP, which has a very good reputation in the combat handgun story and legacy. But unless you're like a history purist, this is not the Gun Collector podcast. There is nothing I don't think wrong with a 1911 in 9mm or 357 SIG or 10mm or anything like that. But in general, unless we say otherwise, we'll be talking about the 45 ACP, the original chambering. First, to be fair, we're going to be talking about what you're giving up with a 1911. And there are some real things that you give up when going to a 1911. And I'm basically going to be talking to this in your kind of average run-of-the-mill polymer striker-fired handgun. You know, your general issue police officer, modern sidearm, even the next, or I should say current issue military sidearm for the general purpose soldier, marine, whether we're talking a Glock 17, a SIG 320, any of those more modern striker fire, high capacity 9mm. One thing you're giving up, obviously, is capacity. Now, I'm talking, for most people, talking about a single stack 1911. You're talking about a 7+1, 8+1, 9+1, 10+1 in your single stack configuration. Compare that to a Glock 17 or a 19 or something like that, where you're generally talking, 15 to 17 rounds. So you're giving up capacity there. And keep in mind, I have several 1911s, two of which are, if you consider them 1911s, the 2011, the STI 2011s, which are double stack 9mm with a standard capacity of 21 plus 1 or 26 plus 1. So you can get high capacity 1911s. So if you want to go that route, you're not giving that up. So you have that. Also, unless you're talking about, like I just mentioned, the STIs or some variation thereof with a polymer frame, you're talking about an all steel with whatever kind of grip, all steel except for the grip handgun, which comes in at around 40-ish ounces. So you're giving up some light weight there. You're also giving up ease of maintenance. If you're used to a Glock and you're the kind of person that doesn't really like to maintain stuff and keep up on stuff, you're giving up that ease of maintenance. Way easier to field strip a Glock than it is a 1911. Especially when you talk about a lot of the modern ones with a full-length guide rod and stuff. You don't have to know what I'm talking about. Just know that the maintenance on a 1911 is a little bit more in-depth than the maintenance on something else. So ease of maintenance and a maintenance regimen is what you're giving up. Now, a good, reliable 1911 is going to do fine. And 1911s aren't like polymer striker fire pistols where they just stamp one after another, and they're pretty much all the same. 1911s kind of have their own quirks and differences, but a good general high-end, dependable 1911, you're still going to have to clean every couple of hundred rounds in general. Whereas some people go the entire length of owning a Glock or something like that and not cleaning it or properly maintaining it, and it still works fine. And another thing you're giving up there is the ability to just drop in parts. You know, if you get a Glock and you want a different extractor, you just drop in the extractor. If you want to thread a barrel, you just drop in a barrel. You buy a threaded barrel for your Glock, you drop it in, no big deal. You want a different trigger bar connector, yeah, you got to have some tools and some punches, but you can generally do it, you know, the old saying, the kitchen table gunsmith. You can generally do it at your kitchen table with fairly minimal tools. You want to change out a trigger bar connector or trigger spring or something like that, it's pretty much plug and play, drop in, you know, in that realm. A 1911, not so. Most things on a 1911 require filing and hand fitting or polishing. You know, whether that's a trigger, whether that's a, you know, a magazine, extended magazine release, especially a barrel bushing, which you don't even have to worry about on a lot of more modern handgun designs. So a lot of stuff on the 1911 has to be hand fit and hand tuned, an extractor. It's a more involved process of ownership if you're really going to own and train with and trust your life to a 1911. So you're giving that up. Also, what you're giving up is how do I word this? You're giving up the easier training curve of a striker fire polymer handgun, and that it's a little bit more complex manual of arms because you have manual safeties. In fact, you may have 2 or 3 or more manual safeties on a 1911. You have your grip safety, which most modern guns don't have, save the Springfield XD, and then you will have a manual thumb safety, which needs to be trained with and understood. So a little bit more time to train with if you're not familiar with it already. Some might consider the safeties an advantage. Some might be considered a disadvantage. So 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. But just know that it is a thing you generally don't think about or train with a Glock or with a Smith & Wesson M&P or with a SIG. Well, the SIG Army version does have a thumb safety, so I guess it would be similar. But most modern striker fire handguns don't have, I guess what I would call active engagement safeties, meaning you have to actively disengage them to have the weapon fire. So you might be thinking, okay, well, I'm giving all that up, so why would I get a 1911? Well, let's talk about what you'd be gaining. What you'd be gaining is, like we talked about, that weapon was adopted by the U.S. military in 1911. It's been through 2 world wars. It's been through a lot of police service, a lot of specialized unit service, and a lot of competition shooting. It is a favorite and still remains a favorite, or its derivatives a favorite in competition circles. All that lineage, all that refinement over the years gives you a very well refined, very good system with all that long pedigree and all those different things that can be done to it. The number one thing I think you get is shootability. Most people shoot a 1911 better than most other handguns. And again, that's my personal opinion based on years of being a professional firearms instructor. Shootability of the 1911 for most people, because it's a single stack, because it has that single stack magazine, it fits most hands well. I think that most modern double stacked handguns people usually buy because what's on paper. Oh, this holds X amount of rounds, it must be better. This holds 2 more rounds, it must be better. But there's a cost for that. If you have giant, large hands, maybe not an issue. But if you have medium to small hands, especially smaller statured people or females that tend to run smaller hands, generally they will hold on to a single stack better. And like we talked, that lineage, you can get different triggers of not that necessarily affect the trigger pull weight or anything like that, or the breaking of the trigger or anything in that nature, but they will affect the length from the back of the handgun to the front of the trigger, which needs to fit your hand properly if you're going to become proficient, professional gunfighter, professional shooter, or even just somebody trying to master a skill. That is very important, that measurement. And a lot of times for a double-stacked modern polymer handgun, that's bigger than a lot of people can deal with. And the trigger on the 1911, I won't say like no other because other guns have copied it and it was based on other guns, but unlike the vast majority of other handguns that have a trigger that pivots on like a hinge, if you think of most triggers on most guns, the 1911 trigger goes straight back in line. And if you're talking about precision, that is important. It's the same, especially if you get a flat trigger. Wherever you put your finger on that trigger, up or down, it's going to go back and forth. If you think about like a fulcrum on most other handguns, that can lead to inconsistency if you put your finger in a different place. Now, ideally, everybody wants to put their trigger finger in the same place every time. I get that, but we are not machines. We are not perfect. And the 1911 trigger really lends itself to being shot well. Also, if you go from shooting like a Glock trigger or an M&P trigger to a 1911 trigger, is almost night and day different. It's like dragging a piano down a gravel road for a Glock trigger versus if you think about like a nice thin glass rod just snapping all at once in a 1911 trigger, just clean and crisp and just smooth. And I don't care how good you are at controlling a trigger. I can shoot a Glock very well. In fact, when I go to like a lot of training classes or when I went with my guys to our training academy, I ran just an out-of-the-box configuration that a Glock 17 comes in, and I still have it, and I still keep it, and I still train with it because I wanted them to see that I could shoot, what I would consider kind of lower tier out-of-the-box handgun very well. But getting back to the point, I don't care how good you can control a trigger. If you make that trigger with less movement and more repeatable, you'll control it better. If you have to hit a certain size target at a certain distance, which is real world gunfighting, not just pulling the trigger as fast as you can't miss fast enough to win. If you're trying to hit a certain target at a certain distance, however fast you can manipulate a long, gritty, slow trigger, you can manipulate a 1911 trigger faster or more accurately or both in the same amount of time. And you might say, yeah, but I can put an aftermarket trigger on my Glock or M&P, and you can. But most professional gunfighters, even myself, when I was writing the policy for the tactical team that I run, because of legal liability reasons, generally that's not allowed for professional gunfighters to change out the triggers in their handguns. So generally they can't. And even if you're saying that you can change out that trigger, you can also modify the trigger on a 1911 to make it even better. So that trigger is something that's just, if you haven't felt a good 1911 trigger, even an average 1911 trigger, and you've only ever shot Glocks, you really should put it in your hand because the audio does not, I think, do it justice. So you're getting that shootability. You're getting that phenomenal trigger. And here's another thing that you're getting that's really important to the gunfighter. You might be giving up capacity, but you're getting a fast first round hit. And if you look at any kind of gunfight handgun statistics for professional gunfighters, whether it's military, law enforcement, civilians, the chances of you needing to reload, empty an entire magazine and reload are very slim. They're even slimmer if you practice judicious marksmanship and actually get hits with those rounds. But the odds of you having to reload in any kind of defensive handgun gunfight are very slim. The odds of you needing to get a fast, accurate first round hit are almost 100%. I say almost because sometimes you pull out your gun because a deadly force situation is authorized and what is necessary and prudent. But before you can pull that trigger, the person gives up or, drops their weapon or somebody else shoots them first or whatever the case may be. They shoot themselves first. So I won't say 100%, but it's much, much more likely that you're going to need to get a fast first round accurate hit with your handgun than it is that you're going to have to reload. And you get, in general, for most people in my training and experience, you get a faster first round hit with a 1911 platform. Like I said, I don't care how fast you manipulate a trigger and how well you manipulate it. If you minimize the amount of travel that it needs and the amount of take-up that it needs and the amount of trigger prep that it needs, you'll do it faster and more accurately. So you're gaining that fast first round hit, which very likely will buy you, I won't say very likely because I don't have stats on that, but it's very possible that it will give you more time to get second, third, and fourth round hits, which statistically seem to be far more important than being able to dump 17 rounds without needing a reload. The other thing that you're gaining is accuracy. Accuracy. Now, a lot of people will say, well, most handguns are more accurate than 99% of whatever, blah, 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 people that will ever shoot them. This is not, average shooter podcast. This is not go out on the weekends with your buddies and just dump rounds downrange podcast. This is gunfighter life. You should be striving to be the best shooter you can be. The talents and gifts that God's given you to strive and be better with them. For Jesus says, to he who has, more shall be given, and he will have an abundance. Take the talent from him. New Living Translation, to those who use well what they are given, even more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who do nothing, even what little they have will be taken away. And we should all be using the talents we're given and trying to be better with the talents God's given us and appreciate them and hone them and refine them as a strong, dominant man in all areas of our life. Knowing God first, knowing yourself, knowing your weapon, striving to use those talents. And you may get to a point where that Glock, that M&P, that whatever is holding you back. You may get to a point where you can shoot more accurately than, I'm just pulling a number out, 4 inches at 25 yards, which is what may be what your Glock 19 can do. So the 1911 is accurate times 2. It's accurate in its mechanical accuracy, especially high-end 1911s can be very, very accurate. In fact, a lot of Wilson Combat 1911s, their website says they guarantee for a lot, not all their models, but a lot of their models in 1-inch group at 25 yards. Also, accuracy in shootability. Accuracy in your ability to shoot it well. So you're gaining that. The next one I'll throw in there is kind of not quantifiable in any real way and probably completely subjective. But 1911s, talking about for me, it seems that 1911s, I don't know the right word to use for it, have a lot more character. Something about the fit and finish of a nice high-end 1911 where everything's metal on metal, except for the grips, and it just fits together like a finely tuned machine where everything just locks up tight and you have confidence in that machine. That's something that I don't get with a Glock 19 or something like that. Doesn't mean I don't like Glocks. No, I like Glocks. I own a couple of Glocks. In fact, one of my General C.C.W. guns, one of my go-tos, probably not one of my most common go-tos, but one of my general go-tos is a Glock 26. It's a great gun. Obviously, it's proven reliable or I wouldn't carry it. Okay, so we've talked about what you're giving up with the 1911, what you're gaining with the 1911. Let's talk about whom I might not recommend to have a 1911 and who I might recommend to have a 1911. Okay, so if even myself, if I were deploying to, Afghanistan or going back to Iraq, would it be my first choice? No, probably not. Why? Because those can be very nasty, unforgiving, dirty environments. And the 1911 requires a higher degree of maintenance, which we discussed. And also, if I'm a soldier or Marine deployed, if I'm infantry, unless I have some kind of specialty, like I was an assaultman in Iraq and I was issued a pistol, most of the time, it's a backup weapon for you. It's not your primary weapon. So it wouldn't be my first choice, but if I was going there and you issued me a nice high-end 1911, like some specialized units still have access to in the military, I wouldn't turn my nose up at it. I wouldn't feel like, oh man, this thing. I'd be perfectly happy with it. It just wouldn't be my first choice, nor would I recommend it as a first choice for like a general issue, average soldier, average infantry, or combat MOS weapon for most soldiers and Marines. But for the more specialized guy, yeah. If you said I was deploying in a more specialized role, kicking down doors, things like that, would I take a nice high-end 1911 with a rail and a light on it? Absolutely, I would. Who else would I not recommend a 1911 for? If it's your first handgun, if it's going to be your first handgun that you go out and buy, and your goal is not just to collect it for historical purposes, but like to actually use, and you're going to get a handgun, I wouldn't recommend the 1911 for a first handgun. It's a mechanically more complex machine to maintain and field strip and work on. You may decide precision rifle is your thing and you're going to have a handgun because you're a red-blooded American and everybody should have one and concealed carry, but it's not going to be your main focus. You're going to dedicate yourself to mastering long-range precision shooting, which is a hard discipline to master, and the handgun is just a side backup tool for you. I probably wouldn't recommend the 1911 for you. For something like a downed pilot in a survival scenario, I probably wouldn't give them a 1911. Why? Because their main part of their job requires a big, large, complex machine that they should be striving to master, i.e. a aircraft. And unless they're just going to do it on the side to take it upon themselves to be a master handgun shooter, they're probably not going to wring out the benefits of the 1911, and that's not their primary job. The odds of them getting shot down are low, and the odds of them getting shot down and they're having to use their handgun for survival is pretty low. And like I said, unless that pilot's willing to train and master that weapon on his own, I wouldn't recommend the 1911 for that. Okay, so who would I recommend the 1911 for? Or who is best served by a 1911? In my opinion, obviously the history guy. The guy that wants like a still effective combat handgun but really loves history, that really wants like a historical, tie to the past, something like that. Obviously the 1911 fits that niche. It is obviously a historically relevant firearm. It is obviously still combat effective. Also for the person that is good with machines, is good with mechanics, and appreciates a high-tuned, high-end machine. The guy that likes having his firearms tuned just right, I'd say the 1911 would be a good choice. The person that has maybe trained with, and maybe this is you, has trained with a Glock or an M&P, or take your pick, a SIG 320, and you've become good and proficient with it, but you want to take your shooting to the next level. That shootability of that 1911, you've probably learned quite a bit about handguns in your training with the other handguns, and you want, like I said, to take your handgun shooting to the next level, that 1911 might be the right choice for you. For the man that wants to master the handgun, who wants to be in that top tier of fast and accurate, who wants that handgun to fit him like a glove. For that professional gunfighter that wants to get that first round hit on target quickly with precision, I'd recommend the 1911. And lastly that I can think of, somebody that wants a dual-purpose protection and hunting handgun. Now, hunting is a hard skill to learn. If you're trying to get into hunting, a handgun is not the way to do that. But if you're a very good hunter and a very good handgun shooter and you want like a dual-purpose, a 1911 and 10mm or 357 SIG or even 45, like I said, that shootability, that first round, which hopefully in hunting is all that you need, quick hit, the accuracy, for someone like that, a 1911 makes a lot of sense. So, maybe some introspection. See if a 1911 is right for you. May cost a little bit more.
in time, both in manual of arms and maintenance, and in actual cost, because a good, finely built 1911 might set you back a little bit more. But you might check it out and realize that there are other guns out there than your striker-fired polymer, high-capacity plastic polymer handguns. What is that quote from Star Wars? A more elegant weapon from a more civilized age? Well, I don't know about the more civilized age thing, because World War I is pretty brutal, but definitely an elegant weapon. A powerful, deadly, highly tuned, elegant machine. So maybe that appeals to you, and maybe not. Maybe you think, I'm going to stick with my Glock. And that's fine. Whether you like 1911s or not, whether you're going to get a 1911 or not, I hope that you either way like, subscribe, and comment. If you like this podcast, you may like some more important ones we do. Simple Man Sermons, the preachings of a simple man called by God to share the good news of Jesus Christ. Also the Alpha Male podcast, where we talk about being an alpha male in today's society, where so many things are trying to keep men from being strong, dominant men that they were created to be. You may check those out. You can find all of those under the umbrella of GoodShepherdTraining.com. Good Shepherd Training on Patreon. You could very much help out, and it won't cost you a dime to like, subscribe, and comment, and share with your friends. But if you would like to support financially, podcasts aren't free. You can go to Good Shepherd Training on Patreon if you think this content. I certainly would appreciate it. As it is written in the Bible, a laborer is worthy of his wages, and you shall not muzzle the ox while it treads out the grain.
But I'd like to give you all some more Bible verses than that. If you listen recently to new episodes, you know I like to do a tactical verse of the day. From Psalm 90. And let the beauty of the Lord our God be upon us, and establish the work of our hands. Yes, establish the work of our hands. The battle is the Lord's, as the Bible says. Whatever we have, whatever talents we have, whatever resources we have, they were a gift from God. Now, it's false humility, I think, and not helpful to deny those or squander those, but to use what God's given us, but to always remember that whatever we have, it was a gift from God. We would not exist if God had not made us, and we wouldn't have anything that God did not give us or allow us to have. So hopefully we stay in a right perspective and are thankful for everything God gives us and allows us to have. With that, thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.